Return to a time when anything is possible. Relive your favorite moments with a Hollywood Insider. Travel with Loop and Larry and their special guest, writer-director David Weiner, to the nostalgic worlds of 1980s sci-fi movies in this galactic journey through space and time as we go in search of tomorrow.
That's the magic of sci-fi, man.
In a world filled with intergalactic space battles, metahuman destruction on a global scale, and psychopathic serial hauntings, there's only one team who can make sense of it all. When your world is overrun with rampant pop culture, call Loop and Larry, Guardians of Geek.
What? Oh yeah.
Yeah. 51 times.
51.
It was number 51.
It was like a restart, I feel, when you get to 51.
Yeah,
Exactly. Now this is almost like the first.
Exactly.
So we're starting again. Here we go.
It's probably better that we do than we could just erase what we've already done. And
That's true. That is
do
true.
it right the second time.
Hey everybody, I'm Loop.
And I'm Larry.
And this is Guardians of Geek, our 51st episode. And we've got a power-packed episode today. Once again,
This is a big one. We just came off of our big 50th celebration of Hilarious House of Frightenstein, and now we're moving into something equally as awesome. So we've decided that 2022 is the year of awesome. So
it is already like we're on fire this year already. This is like our fourth or fifth podcast already this year.
I know. I don't know if we can sustain this. I'm already exhausted, but we'll keep it going.
Before we get into we have a big interview coming up, but before we get into that, I just saw Batman, and I know you did as well, and we'll go into full detail on it. But generally, what did you think about it?
So I've been a DC fan for since I was a kid. My 5th birthday party I had a Batman cake. So I've been a Batman fan from the beginning, and I've read a lot of the comics. And so I'm all about Batman. Now, having said that, I wasn't 100% sold on this movie before it came out, because I was like, okay, it's another Batman movie, and it's the same Penguin and Riddler and that sort of thing. And I was like, I kind of want to see something different. Like, I want to see a different kind of Batman movie. So I wasn't 100% sure. But then I went to see it, and I loved this movie. It's 3 hours long, and I was like, when it was done, I was like, that's it? That was 3 hours? That was awesome. It's very, very dark, and it's much darker than the other Batman movies that have come out. And that's what I like about Batman, and those are the comics that I like, the detective comics. This goes back to his detective roots, and I really liked it. I thought Robert Pattinson was great. He's super brooding, but he doesn't do a lot of this, because he doesn't have that Ben Affleck really deep thing, but he's super brooding and just angry all the time, and I like angry Batman. I guess that's what it comes down to. Give me an angry Batman every time. And what do you think?
I liked it. I wasn't as blown away by it. I've got Batman fatigue. I don't know. Like, I've seen, there's been so many different Batmans now. It looked cool. I will say though, it is dark. A family with little kids actually walked out midway through the movie.
Oh, really?
I think it was just getting too weird and too violent. And I think you hear Batman, people have different perceptions. Like, the comic readers like the dark Batman, but other people know the surface, not quite as dark Batman. So, they should know that there's going to be a certain level of violence in it. But anyway, the family walked out midway through. I enjoyed it. I thought it was fine. I thought it was a tiny bit uninspired, a little bit long. And I know this is just my opinion. Who am I? But there was a few things. There was a little too much whispering in it for me. A lot of people whispered in it, and I was like, why are you whispering? Like, why is everybody whispering in this? But other than that, I thought it was fine. It was fine. Like, it was entertaining. I did like the detective aspect, how he was solving a mystery and using that sort of detective side of him that we don't see as much, because a lot of times we see more of the gadget side of him and the utility belt side, but we don't see as much of the detective side, which is kind of a lot of Batman, and I thought that was great. But there was some good performances in it, and I thought it generally was pretty good. There were some things I like. I wasn't a big fan of Catwoman, but that's just me.
Well, right.
Like when I say uninspired, that I would put her into that category. But it didn't bring anything new to the table, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. But it's still, I thought it was fine. It was a good setup if they're going to do more movies.
Yeah. See, I liked the whole detective thing. I think that, to me, that was the difference with this movie. Is that
it was the difference maker.
Yeah, that was, none of the other movies really had a mystery that literally was that the Batman was trying to unravel. Like literally there was an actual, it was to me, this movie was a combination of The Dark Knight, Christopher Nolan's The Dark Knight, and Seven. The one with Brad Pitt. It was literally like that. Like it felt a lot like Seven. It felt like, detectives figuring out this crime, and it's gritty crime, and it's violent, and there's a lot of like psychotic people and that sort of thing. It really did feel a lot like Seven to me. And that's, I think, what made it different. But I
like that he worked with the police a lot more in this, and trying to help solve this case. And of course he can go places they can't go, and he can do things that they can't do, and he is able to find clues that they can't find either, right? So I think that part was really good. Again, it was good. Like it was good. I just didn't think it was as like great as a lot of people are saying it is, but that's like just
I'm saying it is.
But speaking of Brad Pitt, he was in 2 previews before the movie, different movies, so I kind of felt like he was in it as well. So it was.
Fair enough. The one thing that we should mention real quick is Loop and I were talking before this just about how DC is running their Batman sort of thing, and the fact that there have been multiple movies with multiple people playing Batman, and each movie is sort of a reboot of Batman. So it's hard if you're not like a diehard Batman fan. It's hard because Marvel has set up this universe so brilliantly where all the movies are connected. All the actors are playing the same character in each movie, and they're, a couple of people have changed, but like, and so we're used to the way that Marvel has created it, and DC hasn't figured that out yet. So seeing all these Batman, like, because it's been 10 years since the last Batman movie, so it's it's been a long time. But if it's not super brand new or a continuation, it just feels like, okay, so they're rebooting it again, like they're doing another one. So that's the problem. As big of DC fan as I am, and a big Batman fan, I really want to just see a Batman universe. You know what I mean? Like not just like 2 or 3 movies that are linked together and then that's it and they start again. I would like to see them develop a whole universe that just keeps going on with the same actor, with the same character, and they just introduce new characters, but it's all part of the same thing so that we get an ongoing story. And they just haven't been able to figure that out yet. However, they are spinning this movie off into 2 TV shows. One is about the Penguin. Colin Farrell, who plays the Penguin, is going to be reprising his role as the Penguin on the TV show for HBO Max, I think. Mm-hmm. And then the other one is about the GCPD, and Jeffrey Wright is going to be playing Commissioner Gordon again on that. So I'm hoping that maybe they are starting to create this universe. So this Batman movie will spin off into 2 TV shows that are part of the same universe, and then there might be a sequel or something. So I'm hoping maybe they're starting to figure this out, and this is just the start of it. So I've got a lot of hope.
Well, speaking of universes, I think it's about time you, Larry, introduce our next guest.
You know him as the former executive editor of Famous Monsters of Filmland magazine, and from the magnum opus of 80s horror movie documentaries, In Search of Darkness. And now you'll know him as writer-director of the most immersive celebration of 80s sci-fi movies, In Search of Tomorrow, as well as the only member of the Loop and Larry Four Timers Club. Direct from Hollywood, California, the mecca of geekdom, filmmaker extraordinaire, David Weiner.
Woo!
Hey,
awesome.
Thanks for having me on. Wait, this is the 4th time that I've been on?
Yeah,
believe it or not. Yeah.
It's only my 3rd film. How did you find me the first time? I can't remember.
I have no idea. You were out there. We reached out. You came on, and so really, this is important because one more. If you can come up with one more documentary, come back on. You get the.
Then I qualify to come back, and I get a little
you get the
thimble, a little
you get-
thimble. That's
You get a jacket, a special five timers
you get
club
the
jacket.
five timers jacket.
I was hoping for a snow globe, but I'll take it.
We might be able to make a concession or two. I don't know, but you got to create that doc first.
So David, how excited are you about this doc? Like it's finally out and it's an opus and it's awesome.
In Search of Tomorrow has been a very long road compared to the In Search of Darkness Part 1 and 2 movies that I made, because some pandemic inconvenience kind of happened in the middle of making this movie. And so everything got pushed back and, the dynamics changed quite a bit. But that being said, I'm actually incredibly proud that we have been able to finish this movie. Creator VC is the company that makes it. And people are starting to see it now. I'm so happy that you guys got to see it. I wanted you guys to see it because not a lot of people have seen it yet. It's not out there. We're selling it to the masses at 80sci-fi.com. But you're one of the select few who appreciates this stuff and would actually want to sit through a 5-hour movie of mine.
Well, and so I can tell you, excuse me, like you said, it is a 5-hour doc, a solid 5 hours. However, I was able to manage a full 5-hour sit. And I'm telling you that because this documentary is so compelling. And the way you've laid it out is like you did with the In Search of Darkness. So it's laid out by year, starting in 1980, ending in 1989. So you get these like half-hour blocks of years. So potentially you could watch, a year at a time and go through it that way. So I set the goal of getting up to 1984 because that's around the midway mark. But then I thought, and what's also nice is that in between the years you have these sort of breakaway segments that talk about special effects and talk about various aspects of creating the movie. So there's those little bridges between the years as well. So I thought, okay, well, I'll get to 1984. No, I'll just watch the special effects. I might as well just slip in 1985. I've got some time. 1986 was a good year. I'll watch that because like you forget when you're watching this movie how much of your childhood is represented here, because there are so many movies that came out at the time, and you've chosen like the cream of the crop. I mean, not necessarily the cream of the crop, but the ones that sort of made a big impact. And you just, part of the fun of this movie is anticipating the next movie that you're going to talk about. So you just finished with well, what's a good one, Blade Runner, and then all of a sudden Road Warrior comes up, Mad Max. You're like, oh my gosh, I had forgotten about that one. So there's just so much here. Even if you're not a big sci-fi fan, it's just like remembering the times that we lived in, and the names that you saw in the marquees every week when a new movie opened up. And it's just even if you don't know that much about the individual movies, it's just all of a sudden you're being transported back in time, and that's it. Just I couldn't stop watching.
Well, thanks. Well, first of all, it's all designed where everything is just not enough. So you want a little more, and then you're already on to the next either movie or chapter or whatever it may be. Yes. So, but it is also, conversely designed to, you can get up at any time, because you arguably are not going to miss anything after, 3 to 5 to 7 minute, segments. You could just press stop and come back when you want to after you're you got to change your diaper or whatever. Exactly. But in all seriousness, you make I think a very really interesting salient point, which is that this is not only about the movies, it's about the era, and it's about the time that we all went to these movies, and we got excited about these movies, and we couldn't wait for these movies to come out, and how we discovered these movies, and what might have been going on in our lives beyond the movie theater, or our dens or basements watching this stuff on VHS. There was a lot going on in the 80s. And so when you see these movies, or you see the trailer, or you see people talking about them who either were part of the film or just fans themselves, what's really what sort of dawns on you is that so much was going on in your own life, your own lives, while these movies were playing out, and you were either going to escape over and over and over and over to see these movies. You might have been going through something in your life where this movie was like the salve that really made you happy. It was, it was your happy place. And this was not, people like to look back at the 80s and think, oh, Rubik's Cubes and MTV, and it was all awesome, and shoulder pads and Flashdance sweatshirts. But, I've got my leg warmers on right now.
Of course. Yeah.
But there was the Cold War, was very, very present in all of our minds. The threat of nuclear Armageddon from the two superpowers not agreeing one day. That was always, a step away from our own points of view. And, I used to, when I would go to school, I'd start daydreaming, which didn't take long. I'd look out the window and I'd start playing out like the Red Dawn, playbook in my mind. I'm like, what would happen if all of a sudden like an enemy brigade just parachuted right out my window? This felt very real when you would have a lot of these movies like, Rambo and Top Gun and all the sci-fi stuff that we were doing, Megaforce, War Games. This all kind of brought it right to our front step, and how we dealt with it was, very different for everyone.
Yeah, the sci-fi, which I found really interesting. And I never thought of myself as much of a sci-fi fan. And then I start watching this, and it's like a buffet of sci-fi, right? Like it's just everything. I'm not going to take everything the first time I watch it, but I've got enough there to eat. And it's so good. Like, it's like, there's so many, every movie you put up, I'm like, I love that movie. Oh, I love that movie. And I love that movie. And one of the things I found when I was going through it, of course, me, I'm making a list as I'm watching it, trying to figure out, what I'm going to buy next, because I'm watching this. That's the worst part of this whole thing, because I'm like, oh, now I got this list of movies I need to own. But I'm like, how do I not own like Superman 2? It was one of my favorite movies as a kid. How do I not own Star Trek 2?
Go now and get it.
I did. I went and bought them. They already were sitting at my house. Like I went to Amazon like instantly after, because I have to have these movies in my collection. But the thing I love about sci-fi is that it, like, which you bring into the whole picture, is that it does reflect what's really going on and where we're heading. And it's so interesting. Like, in some things I didn't notice at the time, but your doc brings some of this out, and you're like, oh yeah, that does reflect something that's actually happening. But so when you went into this whole thing, like how did you, like, it's like a puzzle, right? Like you got all your years and all your subject matter. How did you approach this doc?
It's a very overwhelming decade. When we were talking about horror, and I would do horror, even that is overwhelming, because there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, maybe 700 plus movies, give or take, about, in one particular genre. Sci-fi is equally significant, maybe not as many as the horror genre, because they were a little more expensive to produce, arguably, depending on the film. But I had to look at this and decide what was my definition of sci-fi. What is anyone's definition of sci-fi? I think it's a little different from everyone. And you can get, to the fine tune, Star Wars fantasy or sci-fi, the technicality of the definition of sci-fi. Or you can look at it as say, this is collectively part of a mindset that we were really into in terms of the escape and the imagination of genre film. So is Mad Max in the post-apocalyptic genre, does that fit in this story? Does Swamp Thing, or does Reanimator, or Frankenstein science, does that fit? Well, yeah, it is sci-fi. But does War Games, does Miracle Mile, does that fit? Because that's kind of a contemporary reflection, isn't it? Well, there's kind of a what if element to it with just, even it's like James Bond. Like, is James Bond sci-fi? Arguably, yes, when you look at all his gadgets, and those movies are definite, if not sci-fi, reflections of the Cold War era and mindset. So I take this giant stew of many, 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 many movies, which to me was just a happy thing, because I was like, I don't have to be so narrow with my definition. These are all movies that we love for all different reasons. So many of these movies, they straddle multiple genres. You got Alien, you got Predator, you got Running Man. It's, it's action, it's sci-fi. There's some horror in it, depending on it. Horror may or may not be part of Running Man. It's up to you. But so what I have to do is I kind of take all these movies that, like you said, it's like a big jigsaw puzzle. I outline, first of all, it helps structurally to have every single year. But then I go to all these larger context chapters and I say, what are important to be able to tell this tale collectively of the decade while we see this evolution of movies that are also influenced by other movies, and that's why they exist, you know? Like having Cocoon, breaking out Cocoon, next thing you know, you've got Batteries Not Included. One would not exist without the other, which is really kind of interesting, because it's addressing, the old age, which is not especially sexy in the 80s when everything's about youth and Wall Street and, that kind of stuff. So very long answer, short, not really, is it's very, very difficult to ultimately come up with a final list and a final cut of movies that I put in here. There's so much more to be explored and discovered, and the journey will ideally continue if this film does well. But it's just sort of a list of really huge blockbuster movies, some eclectic titles, some straight-to-video titles. But overall, I wanted to be able to sort of have a real broad spectrum of storytelling for a decade.
Well, part of what helped that I found is this transition screen that you use to go between your years. It's literally like a wallpaper of VHS box or movie posters from all of these movies. So of course, of the hundreds that existed, you can only focus on a handful, really. But when you see this transition screen and the camera flies into the next film that you're going to be talking about, you see surrounding it the dozens of other titles that you had totally forgotten about, but then realize, oh my gosh, this genre was massive. Like there was so much out there,
especially if you include a lot of the international titles, which some of the posters are French and Belgian and Czech and all sorts of interesting stuff, Russian stories. It's everyone was impacted by the opportunity to tell really big stories with sci-fi, especially in the 80s, especially in the wake of Star Wars and Close Encounters, and that kind of opened the floodgates.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like because of the timing was perfect in the 80s for an explosion of sci-fi, because like you said, of the world condition, like the Cold War, the conflicts between Russia and the United States. It was really like prime time for escapism. Yeah. And I mean, what better way to escape than to create a new world, like a break for a new world.
And the best sci-fi usually is a either obvious or not so obvious reflection of us. Yeah. And that's why I love that stuff, because you could say, well, it's just, Dennis Quaid and Louis Gossett Jr. in reptilian alien makeup, hate each other. That's a story that anyone can relate to about, having an enemy mine. But the thing is, maybe that could be connected to countries not getting along and learning to get along. Cultures learning to get along who aren't getting along. I mean, you could apply this stuff to however you want to look at it, however dialed in you are to this stuff, or however you go in thinking one thing and then you're like, oh yeah, that's a lot more going on than I expected or thought would go on in any of these films. If anything, the best of sci-fi allows us to have great discussions afterwards and look at ourselves a little differently.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the thing I found too. Like the thing that people forget about the 80s, like it was a boom in a lot of things, right? Like, but one of the things was like you were talking about the Cold War earlier, but also the emergence of computers in the 80s, and like the speed that technology was moving in the 80s it was quite crazy, especially with like NASA and space travel and everything else. There was so much there to go with, and I think a lot of the sci-fi movies jumped on those themes and like war games and took them to another level. Which and I don't know if you like. What's the show that's on Netflix, Black Mirror, where it sort of it can show you a future either that's great or a future not so great. And I think Back to the Future is a good example of that, where you can go one way or the other. It can either be a perfect future or it can be like a future that's dark. And I noticed a lot of dystopian themes in a lot of those movies. And why do you think that is? Why do you think that's the where people went with that?
The dystopian elements? Well, yeah. Then it was much, Will Wheaton is part of our cast. And
he's great.
he has this great. You're wearing your Escape from New York shirt, which is
Yeah.
by way of GI Joe, which is super
Yes,
cool.
yeah.
Will Wheaton has this great line. He's just like, before we lived in a dystopian society, I enjoyed movies about dystopian societies. And then he talks about, we get into, Escape from New York and so on. Everything it's been with us for as long as we all can remember. Whenever there's, I don't want to get into too political, theater and that kind of stuff, but just in terms of like authoritarian regimes and Big Brother and Orwellian worlds, Ayn Rand, whichever avenue you want to take, it's always been, THX 1138, early George Lucas. All this stuff is like, will we be controlled by an unseen authoritarian eye or government? A lot of that stuff where people saw that, Fahrenheit 451, they would see these stories and really connect with it because they would see look at, the rise of Nazism and World War II and so on and so forth, leading up to that. That was the stuff where they're like, this could never happen to us. And then it did. And now we have to tell sci-fi stories to reflect that, saying one day it's going to happen again if we don't watch our backs. Yeah. Maybe some of these people are right because we're kind of on that track again. But that doesn't mean optimistically the pendulum can't swing back. It's all relevant to how all of us, if we unplug from our Zoom conversations for 5 minutes, might be able to, go out and proactively do stuff, that can help a cause or help others. So anyway, that's my kumbaya speech, but it's all relevant because these stories really are, there were a lot of them in the 80s because finally they had the tools, especially with special effects and ILM and visual effects, to really get broad and grand with their canvas of storytelling. And so once others were able to do it, even at a low budget, like on a Roger Corman level, anyone can kind of get a story like this made because everyone wanted the next Star Wars. And so they're all shooting for the moon at various levels of success.
Yeah, and I think going the other way, there's dystopian elements, but the anti-dystopian side of sci-fi was the hope for the future, like the exciting prospect of new technology and things that just seem so like distant. For example, Running Man. You had already mentioned Running Man. There was tech in Running Man that currently exists. There was like voice controlled. You walk into your home and you tell your house to open the blinds and things like that. There was deep fake in Running Man. Long before that was ever considered a real thing. But the idea that maybe someday we'll be able to do these things, like how cool would it be to walk into your house and just tell your house to make the coffee? And so I think Running Man definitely had its share of dystopia, but there was also those moments of like, wow, the future's cool.
What's so cool about that is you can kind of track the inspiration from the 80s and before, with the original Star Trek. And the communicator, and then the first cellular phones after they got smaller than a brick. The first thing that they did was they were flip phones because the guys who made those and the people who made those, they're just like, I want my Star Trek communicator now. But a lot of that technology, it all comes down to, it's not sinister. Technology has it's indifferent to us. So however technology is used, whether it's for, the benefit of mankind or the detriment of mankind, that's all up to us. But it's existing, and it's also inspired by a lot of these movies, even in the 80s, someone says, gosh, I would love that hoverboard in Back to the Future too. People are taking it away as we speak, trying to make those hoverboards a reality, and they might have some already, which are kind of like maybe larger than the kind you could fit in your backpack. Yep. But still, it's being made, and all these movies kind of paved the way or pioneered the ideas to people who are just smart and inventive and are making these things today. And who knows what the future has in store,
Absolutely. I mean, we're really, I mean, we're at the point of having Johnny cabs from Total Recall. You know, I mean, that's there. Self-driving automobiles. It's
We
happening. I
just
mean,
have to get over that little hump of they all smash into, in an intersection every now and then, and that might
yes.
be
Unfortunately, they decided not to put the creepy driver in the
exactly.
who can
But
rotate.
it is very true. I mean, think about it. I mean, we have a computer in our pocket. We can walk into our homes and talk to, various AI companions and just ask them to do mundane things, which is magical compared to what we were living with in the 80s. That was sci-fi with a capital S and F, but now it's starting to become maybe not mundane, but it's a regular thing, as you guys have said, that if you just stop and wonder about that kind of stuff, but I was like that too with all right, now we're showing our age because we grew up right after the wheel was invented and just when we invented fire. But, I mean, I remember in the 70s, the concept of the microwave, and how you didn't have to sit and wait for things to bake or cook on top of the stove. You put it in a magic box, pressed a button, and a minute later you had hot melted cheese. It's like, right? That's like, so, well, yeah, of course we have that, but that was new, at least in our generation. Even answering machines, you didn't have to be home, or if you missed that call because you weren't home, remember you'd have to sit by the phone, the whole concept. Yeah. If you don't want to miss an important call, you got to sit by the phone. Well, that's a luxury we don't have to, we have now that we don't have to do that.
Yeah, but again, it was like in
also
the 80s.
Get off my lawn, by the way.
But in the 80s, like Luke was saying, that tech was so new and emerging that people were still blown away by all of that. I mean, I feel like we're in an era now where tech moves so quickly that it's not as big a shock for us to find the latest operating system appearing, or the latest tech toy that comes out is not quite as like awe-inspiring as it used to be, because it's happening so much more rapidly now. Like I don't know that you could find another era like the 80s to create these kinds of movies, because we just expect it now.
I was marveling just the other day about my own son's toys and how envious I am of theirs. Like he's got not only does he have a Millennium Falcon that is just screen accurate, you lift it up, it makes the sound effects of the Millennium Falcon. It has
That's so cool.
Lever where it has the hyperdrive either works or it doesn't, and it has the movie. I would have killed for that kind of stuff, or just even these like NECA sculpts. I love Mego, and I'm so glad Mego is back, and I collect Megos. But to have a sculpt of your favorite characters and creatures from all these movies that we loved to be so screen accurate now because they're laser sculpt from a computer. Listen, we live in a golden age. That's all I can say. We might be going to hell in a handbasket. At least we're enjoying the ride with our toys.
I want to go back for a second to Larry's reference to all the VHS boxes, or the covers. I don't know if it's just me, but every time you zoomed in, I'd be like, oh my God, where's it going? Where's it going? Because the way you zoom in, it's like, it kind of looks like it might be going to Back to the Future, but no, it goes over here.
There's a little
bit of a fake out on it. And I got almost too excited, I gotta say, of where you were going to land on these movies. But I want to thank you in this doc. I want to thank you for not only doing the Back to the Futures and the Terminators and the bigger movies, but also doing the Mega Forces and the Mac and Me's and some of the smaller movies. Where was that line? Where did you say this needs to be this, even though it's a lower budget, maybe the no one knows what this is about? How did you pick that movie?
Well, I think there's a lot of it's very easy because there were so many great, big, massive movies that came out to put them all in there. But guess they kind of hog up all the space, and there were so many straight to video, low budget films. I mean, there were so many films that I already did segments that I didn't even keep in the movie just due to running time. The running time could just go on forever, but at a certain point you just have to stop. And also because we do Blu-rays and DVDs, there's only so much room on these, discs, which actually helps me edit myself, because at a certain point, I'm a completist. I'd still be going, making all these, doing these interviews and making these movies to put in this film. I think all of these movies, even the ones that are imperfect, are precious to us. So Mac and Me is like a great example, because Mac and Me, there's a whole generation that's a video generation that probably saw that on the video shelf as little kids, or their parents got it because they wanted to get ET, but it was rented. So they got, all right, this one looks kind of ET-ish. It's kind of got the same poster, and the kid watched it and enjoyed it and never thought twice about it. And then they grew up and they're like, this didn't age very well. But, or they saw ET and then poor Mac was, left on the side of the road, kicked to the curb. But these movies meant a lot to us. As I was saying a little bit earlier, these are more about what our lives were like when we saw these movies, just as much as the movie itself. And a movie like Mac and Me might be an easy target for a lot of people, as a punchline, but there's a story behind it. There are people who took time to craft and make that movie. And the reason why that movie came about, I think, is a very interesting story. Just with the whole McDonald's connection is more than just a coincidence. So that, to me, where you could balance, the director of Mac and Me, Stuart Raffle, talking about his project, compared to Dee Wallace talking about, the emotional connection we all have and working on the set, of ET. I think that, to me, is an interesting bookend of a certain type of movie in this decade that I think is important to see the highs and the lows, or the spectrum of the types of films that were being made that were all still essentially the same story.
Yeah. Speaking of which, you have a killer guest list in this. Not to give anything away, but they get they can go deep into some of these stories and some of these movies, and it's so enjoyable. And the fact you have Jesse Ventura alone is like, I love Jesse Ventura as like, he's just so well spoken and has so many just different ideas. Like, what was it like just interviewing even him?
Oh, he was a absolute thrill. I mean, can you believe it? It was also his first interview coming out of his his home, during COVID, so a lot of these interviews, because we shot this one when the pandemic was at top density, a lot of these people, they might have said no because they didn't even want to go out and risk their health. But there are some people, and we did everything safely. I just said that's the caveat there, is everything was socially distant and masked up and wipe downs, and either shot outside for airflow, or plenty of airflow circulation, whatever it may be. We didn't want to put anyone at risk, whether it was the crew, whether it was the talent. But that being said, a lot of these people, it was the first time they were coming out after lockdown, and they were, I have to say real quick, with Jesse Ventura, we had this wonderful interview, and we talked for maybe 90 minutes or so, and then once that interview was done, we talked for another hour afterwards, because he just wanted to tell tales, and he enjoyed an appreciative audience, and he's kind of like, yeah, I kind of gotta go. Anyway, did I tell you about this? And then another hour went by, which to me is just an absolute gift. But what you guys get are these amazing insights and stories that and recollections that sometimes they haven't told before, or they're thinking of it in a new way, or as we recontextualize all this stuff. Not only are they talking about their own projects, but they're talking about the other stuff that they admire, or their perceptions of the era, and how that mattered in the whole context with their films as just part of the puzzle. So super cool. Pinch me, we got such an amazing cast of 70 plus people, people who were in front of the camera, people who were behind the camera, experts, ranging from film critics and hosts to an astrophysicist, a clinical psychologist, and a futurist, to kind of balance out the conversation. Super fun.
That was part of what I really enjoyed about this doc, was not only seeing these celebrities and the people who are in the films talking about their own project, like you said, but really their discussions about other projects and just their recollections of other films creates this whole community of fandom within the film itself, so not only are you watching all of these celebrities who you grew up watching, but you realize that they were fans just like you. They were going to the theater and they were getting excited about going to see Megaforce or whatever it is there, and that you just realize that you're part of this much, much bigger community that really was involved in, discovering these films and enjoying these new worlds and reveling in the tech that they were that they were showing us that didn't exist. And it wasn't just the lowly street people like us who were going to their video store to rent a movie. It was everybody.
These folks are film fans and human beings, and they're just as excitable and equally mystified at life around them. And what's very cool about making these movies that I think is special, as making it something that I would want to watch, is having what is different is what you said. They don't only talk about their projects; they're there to spearhead that. But I really am very interested in all the other perceptions of pop culture and world events and their favorite movies and their favorite filmmakers and actors, and it becomes this big, wonderful conversation where you get to just sit and chat at the back table at a restaurant for as long as they'll let you. 5 hours. I think it's time. Who's going to pick up the check? It's that kind of stuff. But that I think is very interesting, and that's why I love. I'm so happy that, for example, Alex Winter came back. I interviewed him for In Search of Darkness. And he was in part 1 and part 2, and he came back for this, and we sat in my backyard, and he talked for 3 hours about all his favorite movies and all the things that he loved. And
so good.
At a certain point, I'm like, we should probably talk about Bill and Ted before it gets
But that's the thing, is that a fan is a fan. Even if you've worked on a project, you could be like a super fan of something completely unrelated, and when you start talking about that, you forget about everything else. And so I could totally relate to Alex Winter forgetting to talk about his own project, because there was so much out there that was not necessarily cooler or more exciting, because a lot of people love the Bill and Ted's, but just you got your passions and you want to talk. And it's so easy to
also what a crime is if you have a 5-hour movie and you have to wait until 1989 to see Alex Winter, right?
Yeah.
exactly. And that is part of the excitement of it, is that you do see these people right from 1980 to 1989, like they're all the way through it, and that's so cool.
One question I had was I was going to Google this, but I didn't. But what is a futurist, and how did you find one? I didn't know what I'm like. I saw his name. Was it Gray Scott?
Gray Scott.
Is that? Yeah, and I was like, "What a futurist? What is that?" And I was going to Google it, and I was like, "I'm going to wait for you to come on."
I looked into my crystal ball, and he appeared. Yeah, he's like a preeminent futurist, a speaker at NASA events, and think about the many fields of study that you just don't think about,
Right.
And the more analytical spectrum of people who are looking at the world around us, from the sociological point of view of how do we live our daily lives, and looking to the future and how does our behavior now impact our future and the future of the planet. And he's an analytical thinker about that kind of stuff, and he has just reams of knowledge and thought, established thought processes about all this kind of stuff. And
so cool.
He's a big movie fan, so you just take all this cool stuff. He could talk about Blade Runner for 10 hours. Everything about replicants and everything that's involved, spinners, whatever. I can't say it anymore. I cannot speak. What have you? It's really interesting to take a lot of these movies and the themes of the films. We talked about the technology. We talked about the sort of dystopian elements, but apply them in a practical way of thinking to ourselves and where we're going and where we're headed. That to me was valuable and very interesting, and I think hopefully adds a layer of nuance to this film to engender discussion.
That's one thing about this film that I loved that you put together is that I watch these clips that I've seen a million times. I've seen a lot of these movies a lot, but now I want to rewatch them with a critical eye, because after the interviews you've done, it's brought things up that I've never thought of this movie that way. Because of course, when you're young, if you haven't seen it since the 80s, you watched it on a probably action level or something else. But now with this film that you've done, I'm excited to go back and rewatch a lot of these movies and look at them from a different perspective. Like it's such a cool thing that you've done with this, and it makes me excited about the entire sci-fi like genre again, because I'm like, now I'm going back and rewatching Superman or Superman 2 or whatever it is. I'm starting with Superman, by the way. I'm just mentioning that right now. I watched Superman the other day. I hadn't watched it in years, but because of your movie, I'm now back into these sci-fi movies again. It's so cool.
You know, Superman 3 is also, by the way, you know, all these movies, whether they age well or not, I think was super cool because it's so many, literally decades later now. You can look at these with a not a cynical but a critical and analytical eye, just in terms of what was the intent of making this film. Was it simply to entertain, or was it to tell a deeper story, or both? You know, what zeitgeist does it kind of capture? You know, Superman 3, you know, Richard Pryor is like a computer hacker genius. You know, you're talking about like the advent of computers in our own home during that time. That was a massive spike that changed in the course of a decade, where, you know, all of a sudden we're just, you know, practically moments later, we're all talking to each other on the internet and chat boards. So it's kind of interesting to look at these from whether or not you liked Superman 3. There's so many elements there that are pure sci-fi, pure 80s, pure elements that I never realized because I was a little older. I mean, I saw Superman 1 and 2 in the theater. When Superman 3 came along, I personally, while I really enjoy Superman 3 and 4, simply because I'm happy to see anything with Christopher Reeve as Superman. I'll take that any day. By the time 3 came along, Superman 1 and 2 were more serious. And then I was like, I don't want comedy Superman. You know, the poster is too goofy. I'm not into it. So I didn't look at it the same way that a whole other generation that was younger than me got their Superman movie. Next thing I know, they're watching this kinder trauma moment of this woman transforming into a cyborg, and they're all freaking out because it's this dramatic moment. I didn't know that was a dramatic moment until I saw so many people sharing that concept online. I don't know if you knew about that.
Yeah, no. When I noticed that in the doc, you actually say, you know, kinder trauma moment. And it occurred to me, yeah, that's a big deal.
I made a big deal out of pointing out that moment because I became aware while I was doing my research that this is this pivotal moment in a lot of kids' lives where they saw this thinking, oh, fun, Superman, yay, superheroes and a cape. And then they were like absolutely scarred from this moment, you know? And to take the conversation in another direction ever so briefly, you know, there are a lot of films that are kiddie films that have really frightening moments that really, really, really make these, they sear these indelible, scary moments in our lives. Like I remember seeing Pinocchio and, oh, Pinocchio, it's so cute. I got to tell you, I practically crapped my pants when they all turned into donkeys, you know, on Paradise Island. Or was it Pleasure Island? Pleasure Island, I think. Yeah. But you know, I that came out of left field. The next thing you know, there's this monstro giant killer whale that swallows them up and is going to kill them. It's just like that went from whimsical to deadly real fast. Yeah, turns on a dime. And I remember being, to this day, I think about that in my mindset and how scared I was, because I remember I watched that. And in the theater, because I watched like a revival review, you know, a screening of it, I remember thinking to myself, I'm afraid that I'm going to turn into a donkey now. Really? No. I was 28 when I saw that.
I can give you my moment like that, because I have one too. And it I had forgotten about it for a while, but because of this doc, it flooded back, and now I'm, you know, back in therapy. But in Flash Gordon is one of my favorites of the genre. I just love it. It's so quirky and strange and funny and weird and beautiful to look at. but the one moment, and now I just had a brain. I can't remember the name of the character. He was the one all in black. He was the
Flightus.
yes.
I know exactly where you're going with this.
When they throw him onto the platform with the spikes, and he lands, and his eyeballs and tongue bulge out of his head. That literally, I could not get over that for weeks and weeks and weeks. And literally now, 40 years later, it's still in my head. So I rewatched Flash Gordon after watching your doc, because I hadn't watched it in a couple of years, and I had pictured in my head the way that moment played out. And in my head, it played out the way a Play-Doh, one of those Play-Doh machines where it literally oozes. That's what I saw in my head. And so when I rewatched it, and it's literally like his eyeballs bulge out, like maybe a 2 inches, and his tongue sort of grows a little bit. That was not at all what I had in my head.
Not as extreme as you remember.
No,
I remember remembering it as being extreme.
Yeah, but it was such a traumatic moment for me as a kid. Over the years, I built it into this grotesque, horrible scenario.
Or that scene where they all have to put it in Arborea, where they have the rite of passage, where they have to put their hand in that killer
tree trunk
woodstone formation thing, where there was a killer creature in there that was going to get you. I mean, that was really, really intense. We were so it was such a treat to have Flash Gordon himself, Sam J. Jones, Melody Anderson, Dale Arden, even Deep Roy, who has been in more of these films than anyone realizes, based on his diminutive size. Everything from Flash Gordon to being in the Star Wars movies and so on and so forth. It's just super cool to get their perspective on all this stuff. And they're used to years and years of people saying Flash Gordon's dopey, and so they're not to defend it, but to say to explain it. And it's very cool to be able to have.
Oh, absolutely! Like revisiting that was a big moment for me, just because you like Matt said, you've got a different perspective on this whole thing now. You go back and rewatch these things as adults, and it's an entirely different experience. Like the nostalgia is real.
And Melody Anderson these days is a therapist, and so I really enjoyed sitting with her because I got a free session.
Yeah,
perfect.
Now, how ironic would it have been for somebody like me, who was traumatized by the movie she was in, to now go to her to talk about the trauma that she caused?
I've scheduled an interview for my therapeutic release. Anyway.
Yeah. You kind of have to. There are a lot of moments like that in these films, and you don't realize until you go back and revisit them. Like they hit you in an entirely different way. Now you realize I should not have been watching that when I was I recently rewatched Life Force, because that was another one that
you shouldn't have been watching that as a kid.
No, but I did. I was 14, I think, when it came out.
Oh, well, that's the ideal age.
It was. And I remember watching it. And then I watched it like a week or two ago, and I thought, I would never have let my 14-year-old son go to the movie theater to watch this thing. It is so like...
Well, it's that or The Birds and the Bees. Which one are you going to do?
Well, I guess that would have been an easier way to do it. But
next time you watch Life Force, take a look at Matilda May's eyes. When they do a close-up on her eyes, she has these contact lenses that has a spiral for the hypnotized.
Oh, is that right?
Oh, cool.
Yeah, when it gets real close to her eyes, like when she's on the table, sort of hypnotizing that guy before she sucks his life force out.
Yes.
There's a close-up of her. Whenever there's a close-up on her when she's about to do her damage, it's kind of a cool little trick that they did to subconsciously add a layer of hypnosis.
It's cool. And I have to say that to me, that movie still holds up. It's still pretty exciting. The special effects obviously are, very 80s inspired, but it's still,
Patrick Stewart's first on-screen male kiss,
Yes, that was, I totally had forgotten about that. I mean, I guess at the time it just happened. I was a kid. I didn't, wasn't even thinking about it. There we go. But now it's a different experience.
There's more baggage to that scene, right?
Yes. yeah, that was pretty exciting.
Yeah, my parents let me watch The Thing, like when it was like, I think it might have been like when it came out like 83, like the year after, like on VHS, and I couldn't sleep for like weeks after, because I was like, I would have been young when that came out. Like, would that come out 82? The thing.
Yeah, it came out in 82.
Yeah, so this has been probably 83 on VHS, and I was like traumatized from it. I love it. It's my favorite movie, like one of my favorite movies, but at the time I was like, just like all the images of the dogs coming out and like whatever, like, oh my God, I was like, I couldn't sleep forever.
Some of the greatest practical effects of the era, from courtesy of Rob Bottin, and
so good.
And some bonus work by Stan Winston, which a lot of people might not know, which was super cool, and very, very fun to have Matt Winston in Search of Tomorrow to talk about the work of his dad, and the work on Predator, and the work on The Thing, and a variety of other really, really well-known and iconic movie creatures, especially in Aliens and the Queen Alien. It's like there's so much amazing craftsmanship that went into these films as well, and they were not CGI.
No. But this goes back to your point of trying to find the delineation between horror and sci-fi. I mean, trying to come up with what classifies a movie as sci-fi. I mean, Flash Gordon is 100% sci-fi in my opinion. However, it had this really horrific horror moment for me, right, that now turns it into a horror movie. And the same with The Thing. The Thing is very sci-fi-ish. I mean, it's alien, it's but it's definitely a horror movie. I mean, there's a lot of crossover. I just, like we were talking about before, it would have been so hard for you to decide what's what.
What's also interesting is, like, a lot of people who know the names of some of these that were dropping, like Stan Winston or Rick Baker or Tom Savini or Rob Bottin. Most people say Rob Bottin, The Thing, like, and that rocked their world. A lot of people, unless you really know this stuff, and I know a lot of you do, but they might not know that Rob Bottin designed and sculpted and crafted the RoboCop suit that's sitting right next to you.
Yeah.
And there were major battles involved in terms of making that functional for the film with Paul Verhoeven. So, like, to have, unfortunately, Rob Bottin, he's like the J.D. Salinger of practical effects. He just has hidden, and does not want to come out. But I mean, I got a cavalcade of folks. William Sandell is the production designer who's good friends with Rob Bottin. He talks about working on RoboCop, but we also got Peter Weller. We got Nancy Allen. Kurtwood Smith, Paul Verhoeven, the director. It was like a kismet perfect storm to be able to have these guys talk about making that film.
It's amazing. And what's nice now,
Ronnie Cox also.
Oh yeah. What's nice now is that we're living in an era where film restoration is a big deal. So we're starting to now see all of these movies that we're talking about being re-released in 4K. I mean, so not only are we getting to revisit these movies, but we're getting to see them in a quality that we've never seen them before.
We're getting to see wrinkles we never saw before. We're also getting to see bald cap lines we never saw before.
Yes, well, yeah, exactly, which is good and bad, because it's great to see a pristine copy of RoboCop. I've pre-ordered the 4K RoboCop because I really want to see all the fine details. However, because everything was done practically in the 80s, you are now seeing the wires holding people and the bald caps, and so it demystifies a little bit of the of the movie.
I always was confused from the get-go when I first saw Blade Runner, and I saw the spinner taking off, and there's clearly cables lifting it up, but there's enough distraction in the shot to make you say, wait, is that intentional, or what is that? And then you're on to the next shot and you don't really think about it again. But I always used to think to myself, it's like, they're so clearly there, yet they didn't, like The Exorcist, they literally went frame by frame to erase the wires that are holding, the levitating Linda Blair in The Exorcist. They did not do that for Ridley Scott's Vision in 1982, which I think is very interesting, meaning they just didn't want to spend the money to do it. And if you look at later versions, they finally got rid of it. But I think that's very interesting just there about what, we assume that the movie that we're watching is what everyone's vision should be, and the final cut of what everyone really wants, including the studio. And oftentimes, much like Joe Dante in the movie talks about. The movie isn't even finished, and the studio just wants to dump it because of political reasons or financial reasons. You know, like with Explorers, for example. It's very interesting how elements of the business. I don't put too much of it, but just enough there to give a little context of, you know, why certain things were a certain way.
So I think we asked you this question when we were talking to you about In Search of Darkness. Who was the person who you were most excited to talk to? Of all the 70 plus, who was
you always make me pick. I have to pick.
Pick your favorite.
Sophie's choice of 71 people. But I before Star Wars came along, I was a Star Trek nut through and through, and I still am a Star Trek nut through and through. But once Star Wars came along, it was kind of like it took that thunder away a little bit. You know, it's like that meme, you know, of the boyfriend and the girlfriend walking, and
yes,
comes by. You know, it's like Star Trek, you know, and then Star Wars just walked. And, you know, and Planet of the Apes is pissed right next to me. But I would have to say having Walter Koenig sitting in my backyard.
It's so cool.
I keep on saying backyard. At a certain point, I was filming a large portion of this film in my backyard due to the pandemic, and I wanted a controlled environment where we could shoot outside, but it could be in a place that I can stay as long as I wanted, and you know, limited noise, you know, in interruptions and so on and so forth.
Right.
Although I had to pay off a lot of gardeners and their leaf blowers, but it was super. It was an out-of-body experience to have Chekhov show up and hang out and tell stories about the original series, the movies, you know, the first space shuttle, which was named Enterprise, and how we felt about that.
Mm-hmm.
That is absolutely priceless to me, and to be able to have him there was super cool. And I can't pick favorites. I mean, I had Adam Nimoy, the son of Leonard Nimoy, in my backyard talking about his dad. You know, I mean, that's
so cool,
amazing,
awesome.
But I still can't pick favorites because I got to sit down with one of my all-time favorite directors, one of my all-time favorite films, and that's Nicholas Meyer, who wrote and directed Star Trek: Wrath of Khan. You know, and I was a huge fan of Time After Time. That's when he first got on my radar in 1979. You know, with Malcolm McDowell, you know, and David Weiner, you know, as H.G. Wells and Jack the Ripper. It's just as you guys would feel, I felt the same way. As sci-fi geeks who just love these, and these movies mean so much to us, other than a distraction for an afternoon or an evening. Yeah. Getting to talk with these folks and getting these stories, but also just to realize that they're just, you know, human beings like everyone else, and super friendly and casual. I mean, sitting with, you know, Bruce Boxleitner again in my backyard. Shooting the shit and making conversation. He's like, you know, throwing in things like, oh yeah, I was working on the show. It was Scarecrow and Mrs. Smith, and we were doing this, and I'm like, oh, I get a Scarecrow and Mrs. Smith story today too. That's fun.
You need to get a plaque made and stick in your backyard that says, on this spot in 2001 sat list, because it's literally, I mean, to have that group of people sitting in one location, that's a pretty historic location right now.
I cannot complain. It was pretty cool.
Yeah, I had Larry in my backyard. Not as exciting as I thought it was going to be. It was didn't land like I thought it would. But
you just have to renew that restraining order.
Yeah,
exactly,
that is true.
He does.
Well, before we get into like how people can get involved with and get this doc in their hands, tell me about your premiere, because you said a premiere a couple weeks ago.
Yeah,
and that's exciting because this would be like after being in the pandemic for 2 years and not seeing people and having people's instant reaction to one of your docs, like right there. How was that? Was that pretty cool?
It was amazing. You know, everyone, we're in Los Angeles. It was literally the Hollywood premiere. It was just at this wonderful private theater called the Harmony Gold Theater, which is this amazing theater. Everyone, you know, they checked our vaccination status to get in. Everyone wore their masks inside. We did a Q&A because it's a 5-hour movie. We did 2.5 hours, then took an intermission break, did a Q&A, and then did the rest. And the Q&A was myself, executive producer Robin Block, film critic, NPR film critic Tim Cogshell, and Lance Guest of The Last Starfighter. And it was moderated by Angelique Roche, who is a sci-fi host and other things, and she's in the film as well.
Yeah.
So it was very, very, very cool. But this is a film that is designed, it's crowdfunded by a small company, and we manufacture it and distribute it ourselves directly to all the backers who support the creation of this film. So it's not designed for theatrical, to be distributed. But it's so nice to be able to see it on the big screen, because working on it in a vacuum, I'm like, well, this might be funny, this might be entertaining, this might have an emotional response. But then you finally get to sit with everybody and really hear the oohs and the ahs. And, when we're going along the wall of posters and they don't get to the movie that they wanted, every now and then you hear like, oh. But then we come around to it at another point and they're like, yay.
That's awesome.
And that's exactly how you feel. I mean, it really is. That's exactly how I felt as I was watching this, because you cut the segments to the perfect length so that you by the time you get to the transition screen, you're just so excited. You're not, you're waiting for that next. Yeah, it's very exciting.
And just some of the lines, some of the stuff that's in there that I thought might be funny, might have gotten a laugh or crickets, but there were some other things unexpectedly that I thought, well, that's amusing, but it got big laughs. And
that's cool.
It's just, I think the overall tone of this, people are really connecting to, and that's just that this is an entertaining celebration of a decade, and we're not here to really do this hardcore dissection where it's spreading a lot of sort of negativity and cynicism about it. Even if a film is well known as not being very good, it still gets the respect it deserves and the investigation or discussion that it deserves, and everything else around it is it's just so fun, especially to see, Barry Bostwick talking about Megaforce. That got some serious laughs.
That's the thing about, I find with fandom, and we go to a lot of Comic Cons and that there's not one movie that doesn't have fans like that, or someone's connected emotionally to it in some way, shape, or form. Every film means something to somebody, and that's why these little films like a Megaforce is like so important. Because I remember that movie, and it was a movie that had impact on me because it actually looked pretty cool at the time when I was a kid. Like it was very colorful, very comic looking, and it was awesome. And
advertised in every single comic book we read.
That's right. Inside, that's right. Yeah. And Buckaroo Banzai too. That was another one that I was like, I used to love. It's represented in your movie as well, and it's so cool. But how do people get this in their hands? Because I've got the you got to have these in your hands. You got to have these. You got to have them in your collection, because if you have any love of sci-fi 80s, this is a must, and you've got to have it. So how do people get it?
Just now, between now and March 27th, which is the cutoff, you have between now and March 27th to go to 80sci-fi-doc.com, and that's how you can get your physical copy of this. There's no other way to get it other than from us, where you can get a Blu-ray or a DVD. Comes with all sorts of cool things, slipcover, 3 exclusive posters, digital download, stickers, all sorts of fun stuff. If you go to 80sci-fi-doc.com or our socials at 80s Sci-Fi Doc on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, you can find out all that information. But if you get it between now and this deadline at March 27th, you also get to have your name in the credits, which is super duper cool.
Which is very cool.
And after that, no one can ever say that they could ever do that. And so, but a lot of people really value having physical media in their hands. I think this generation, looking behind you, Larry, I think maybe you might be into physical media a little bit.
Yeah, I don't think I'll ever give up the physical media. I know.
No,
I do subscribe to the streamers, but there's just something about, and now with the advent of Steelbook, I just, I can't.
They've got you. But the thing is,
and I have to tell you, you're going back to In Search of Darkness, when you offered the bonus slipcase to house all 3 versions, I was like, this is a collector's dream to have a slipcase to hold the 3. It's just one of those things that just brought me a lot of joy.
I've been working. I had to work. I'm now making a 3rd film so I could have a slipcase to hold 3 movies.
Yes.
But yeah, a lot. What I never quite anticipated, you know, when I made In Search of Darkness, I hoped that people would like it, of course, or enjoy it, or want to share it, or talk about it. But what I never really expected, because those are 4.5-hour films, and then this is a 5-hour film, In Search of Tomorrow, the repetition of people wanting to go back for more and more and more, or watch it over and over and over again. I guess it's so dense with information and material and moments, you know, that people find themselves going back to these over and over and over again, which obviously makes me very, very happy.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of people use these as, like you've said, you know, like lists. You know, what can I watch? What have I missed? You know, even if it's not covered as a movie segment, there's allusions and references and visual moments with many hundreds, if not thousands, of films.
Yeah.
And I'll give you a super secret tip, which may or may not be ridiculously obvious, but I've had people say, "Oh, I have to pause it so I could, you know, look at the posters and see what else to see." Well, if you just watch the end credits, it lists every single poster in chronological order, and that might be helpful too. But every single film clip that's in this movie, it's all credited. And so that's also another way you can kind of build your own list of what you might want to see.
I think though the problem is as a product of the 80s, and a product of video stores, I know it by the cover. Sometimes I don't know the name of the film because I know the visual of that cover, because they did cool covers back then to get you hooked in to see the movie, like a Mac and Me, that I would rent it, but I wouldn't know the name of the movie. So that's why those covers are so cool, because I'll go, I remember that cover. I totally seen that, and I'd like to rewatch it. So,
and that's a whole other avenue that we touch on, which I think is super cool, that our generation really connects to, and that's the video store experience, you know, and you know, as Will Wheaton likes to say, you know, the high stakes Friday night, you know, battle to get all the titles you wanted, you know, for the weekend and stack them up in your arms. And part of the process for us was not, you know, streaming and going through a bunch of, you know, swiping through titles like Tinder, you know, on you know, you literally were, you know, discovering new things, and you know, you knew what you wanted or you didn't. You just wanted to go pick something for your weekend or for your Friday night. And that's how so many of us discovered so many of these other films, is you bypass it over and over and over, but that box art would stop you in your tracks. And you're like, it's, you know, does it have all the ingredients of what I'm looking for? You know, sex, violence, adventure, imagination, you know, space, you know, apocalyptic wasteland, you know, Mad Max and Mad Max Thunderdome are always out, but I see this battle truck. I see that steel dawn. Maybe it's finally time to give those a go. And see, you know, Patrick Swayze is in this one. He never disappoints. Maybe he'll dance. You know. So
absolutely.
That was part of our experience back then, which sadly now is not part of our experience anymore. So there's like one added level of nostalgia for something that we may or may not just completely have mundanely taken for granted back in the 80s.
If they could somehow create a candle that embodied the smell of a video store, they all smelled the same, because it was all that, like the paper, the cardboard, and the glue.
Just not the section where you had to go through the beads.
Yeah, no.
Or the squeaky saloon doors.
Doors, yeah, that's right.
They all had that smell. It was quite an experience, absolutely.
So what's next for you? Because you've done, I know, I don't want to put too much on your back already, more stuff, but I know you're finishing up the third horror doc. But are you planning to do more after that? Am I going to see like a Search for Adventure series, or what am I seeing here?
Well, yeah. We have at Creator VC, Robin Block and our team. We have lofty goals, and we love all this kind of stuff. We're film geeks ourselves, and you know, when you think about it, if you are a film geek, it's, you know, you may have a preference for one particular genre, but you love all genres, right?
Yeah.
You know, some more than others, but even those hybrids are like the best thing, because you get a little taste of everything. So yeah, next up for me, I am going to, we're in production now, but I need to make In Search of Darkness Part 3, and you can look for that around October. That being said, we're working on In Search of Legends, which is 80s fantasy. You know, and if you think about fantasy, and this is the very beginning stages of this, so we're
That's my
developing more.
genre. I love the
But
fantasy
you
one.
know, everything from Conan the Barbarian to Never Ending Story to Dark Crystal to whatever you know is fantasy to you. There's so much in that particular genre. So that's one thing we're working on. And you know, we're aiming to take In Search of Darkness, now that we've done 3 that take place in the 80s, we're going to move to the 90s, and we're going to move to 70s. Not sure what's going to be first out of the gate, but there's these wonderful decades with all this wonderful filmmaking that has a different vibe to the whole decade in terms of the filmmaking. And so there's that, and there's another documentary about FPS, first person shooters, video games.
Cool.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah.
And we've been developing like In Search of Pixels, you know, just a larger scale this story of video games. And so
this is awesome.
That's just, you know, those are some of the things that we have in the works at various stages. So we're just have to be patient because we can't do it all.
Are you going to do a show, one called In Search of Sleep?
Yeah.
In Search of Rest.
Yes, exactly.
We will definitely have to get your 5-timer jacket ready, because I mean we're going to need to talk about all of this because Loop and I are fans of it all. I mean,
it's so good. You did such an amazing job on this. It's like, it's incredible, and people need to have it in their collection. And if they don't, I'm going to come looking for them. If they don't have it.
Well, no, I really appreciate you guys. You always have this incredible, you know, just genuine childlike enthusiasm. Maybe not sophomoric, maybe not.
We are childlike, that's for sure.
Childlike, I think, is the polite word to use. But yeah, no, it's like you guys are so enthusiastic about all this stuff. I keep on going to our generation. So first of all, again, get off my lawn. But there's this great book. Forgive me to the author because I forget his name, but it's a book about this concept called rejuvenile. And it's about it basically discusses kind of our generation, where we grew up with parents who had to kind of put their childhood behind them because that's what society told them to be. They had to be mature and adults, and you can't have toys. And you know, even though they might have wanted them or coveted them, my dad collected Lionel trains that he couldn't have as a kid, and to the point where he went to train conventions. But that was late compensation in his life. We're a generation that we're finally kind of allowed to do both. You know, it's not immature to have a bunch of toys with you. You know, if you are a mature individual with your life and you can balance your checkbook and pay your bills and be a responsible participant in society, doesn't mean that you can't have, you know, all your toys on your desk, you know.
Yeah.
Because it reminds us all of just these happy moments, and why bury your happy childhood or happy childhood memories of toys and movies and music and collectibles. I think we live in this wonderful time where we could it's encouraged and validated to totally wear your Escape from New York GI Joe shirt, you know, or your Star Wars, you know, pullover or whatever it may be. Or your Nostromo shirt. You know?
Oh yeah,
right.
Yep.
So you know, we get to fly our geek flags and not get beaten up behind the gym at school anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is literally a golden age. Like we are very fortunate to have been born when we were. But what's nice is that you are now capturing those moments. So we can go to one place and watch all of our memories. After I finished watching the doc, I made a comment on the 80s doc Facebook page about watching this documentary is like reliving your memories now enhanced. That's what it is. It's, you know, you've got all of these memories in one place, but they're now bigger and better than you remember them. And that's awesome.
Well, I appreciate you know, both of you guys just sharing what you felt about this movie. I'm glad you enjoyed it and you connected to it on an emotional level, you know, because there's 2 levels to this film. There's the intellectual side, but there's an emotional side. And I think all of us really, myself included, I mean, I made this film, so I know what's in it, but I watched some of this stuff and I'm like, Oh, I missed that.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yep.
100%. But it's great. It's so fun. So fun.
Well,
Keep
thank
doing
you
it.
so much. Thank you so much, David, for being with us once again. We're looking forward to your fifth appearance and in your next film, which I guess would be the horror, the third
In
horror
Search of
series.
Darkness 3.
Yep.
Let's rendezvous in around Halloween time, and I'll wear my.
I've already ordered it. It's ready to go. So
Yep.
we're set. Thank you so much, David, for joining us. We really appreciate having you here.
Always a pleasure with you guys. Thank you.
That was amazing.
It's so cool.
It's just getting the documentary itself gave us backstory and all these, and then to hear from David talking about the making of the doc and what this means to him and what this means to, just fans in general. It's so cool to relive these moments. That was awesome.
We didn't really get into the scope of how big this doc is and how much it encompasses of like our memories as kids, but it is totally worth owning and totally worth having. And I'm not just saying that, like, again, like he said, like I could rewatch this doc again, no problem. And, watch maybe 80 and 81, and then come back and watch 82 to 83. Like it's put together in such a way that it's just so interesting. It's so good.
And so, like you said, there is so much. And I've literally never watched anything for 5 hours at a time. And I literally watched this thing. I kept texting Loop. I'm like, I'm going to stop now. No, I'm going to keep going. 5 solid hours. I watched.
Last time you did that was you were watching your neighbors through the bushes.
Exactly.
Other than that, like
that wasn't nearly as fun. But this, seriously, if you have any interest in 80s movies at all, even if it's not sci-fi, the nostalgia is so good in this. You will absolutely love just going back and revisiting all of these things. Highly recommended.
Again, 80scifidoc.com and get yourself a copy. Thank you so much for joining us on the show. Make sure you follow us on our socials. Make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel. I don't think I've ever said that before, but I guess I keep forgetting we're on YouTube. YouTube it's kind of our primary thing pretty much now, but watch us on our YouTube channel, subscribe. And I want to thank everyone who has subscribed since our last show, that we've got a bunch of new subscribers. So thank you. Tell your friends, get on board. And thank you so much. Again, I've got all the socials up right now, and follow us on everything, because there's so many things to follow us on.
We're on everything. We are on everything. If there's a thing, we're on it.
Yeah, that's right. If it's there, we're part of it. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you next time on Loop and Larry, Guardians of Geek.
Bye-bye.
Produced by Matthew C. Loop and Lawrence Simner. A Loop and Larry production.
Bueller.
He likes it. Hey, Mikey.
Bueller.
Bad news. Fog is getting thicker.
And Leon's getting larger.
Inconceivable.
Brian's right. It's an elf.
Wax on.
Does Barry Manilow know that you raid his wardrobe?
Oh, Captain, my captain.
Life moves pretty fast. You don't stop and look around once in a while, you could miss it.
Wax off.